Hi guys, I'm back again, and today I wanted to make a video about something that I've been thinking a lot about lately and really considering, and that is what keeps me motivated to keep studying Japanese even though it's now been almost 2 years since I finished studying Japanese in a formal way at higher education. I graduated from my Japanese degree in 2013, in the summer of 2013, so it's probably been well over 2 years now since I last did my last actual lesson in Japanese. But I'm still studying now. I'm still working on trying to improve my Japanese as much as I can, and even though it's been that long since I graduated, and I have no current prospect of going back to Japan, at least not for anything more than just a quick visit. I've really been thinking about what motivates me to keep going, because several times over the last couple of years I have fallen out of practice. I've stopped for sometimes months on end actually doing anything Japanese related, but recently I've been probably working at it harder than I ever have before, probably even harder than when I was actually still at university or even out in Japan. So I was just sort of going through and thinking about the different reasons and the different things that keep me going and keep me studying Japanese day to day. Probably the easy answer to give, and the one that I usually say to myself, is that I shouldn't really need motivation. Studying Japanese was never a means to an end, really. For me, at least. It was almost a hobby as much as anything, like a passion of mine, and there shouldn't really need to be a goal in mind for me to want to keep studying. When I first started studying Japanese, it was the first subject really that ever grabbed me and drew me in at school and made me want to keep studying even when I got home. You know, I used to come into college back when I first started studying Japanese, when I was doing my beginner's certificate and my GCSE, and I'd come in early in the morning when I had a free period. I'd drive into college, and I'd go to the library for the first couple of hours of the day and practice my kanji or learn some vocab or do some revision. Because I wanted to learn the language. It wasn't about getting, a good grade or passing a test or anything like that. It was because I just really enjoyed doing it. It was opening up a whole new world and a whole new set of skills that I'd never really thought about before. I'd never really bought into buying a language at school. It seemed like too much effort, and I just couldn't really get into it, whether it was German or French or whatever. But when I started studying Japanese, that really changed, and I discovered that it was the first thing that I was ever really passionate about studying. So that really is the basis of everything. I certainly wouldn't have got this far without that. But at the same time, I have to admit that you do need goals. You do need some sort of structure, or at least I do. Some people could do it, just purely because they can. But personally, I find that I really do still need to set goals and targets and have things in mind to work towards to keep myself motivated to a certain extent. Because otherwise I find myself falling into this cycle of just thinking, well, I've done relatively well. I've learned, I've got to a decent level of Japanese. I can converse. I can survive in Japan. If I went back to Japan, it wouldn't be a problem. I've got a good enough level there that will stick with me for the rest of my life. Everyone gets rusty if they don't practice something enough, but my level is good enough that if I was in Japan, enough would come back to me quickly enough that I'd be okay. But you need to have ways of motivating yourself. So one way I try to keep motivated to keep studying Japanese as much as possible is that even though I'm in the UK, it's been 3 years now, almost, since I returned from my year in Japan. I flew back at the end of July 2012. But I try to immerse myself still as much as I can in the language whenever possible. I live in a little village on the south coast of England. The average age is probably about 80 odd, and you certainly don't get a lot in the way of tourists down here, let alone Japanese speaking tourists. There literally is no way whatsoever that I could practice my Japanese face to face in the local area. There's a few Japanese students at the university in the closest city to me, but they tend to be very short-term students, generally up to maybe a semester. But the vast majority of exchange students there, I think, in terms of Asian exchange students, tend to be Chinese. So there's not really anyone in particular that I would be able to practice my Japanese with day to day. So I try and absorb as much Japanese as I can from other sources. I make sure to try and listen to the NHK News podcast almost every day. There are days, of course, where I'm a bit busy, but whenever I've got a spare hour, I try and listen to the NHK News Journal podcast, which sort of gives just a sort of summary of the day's big stories, and they get people in and discuss different things that have happened over the course of the day. So I try and listen to that. I mentioned in... No, I didn't. I was going to say I mentioned in a video I made recently, but I haven't actually got around to editing that video, so that wouldn't make sense. But one thing I have been doing lately is getting on the subreddit JTV, which I'll plug here because it's really useful. So if you are studying Japanese, get yourself over to the JTV subreddit, and it's just a place where people upload bits of Japanese television, documentaries, game shows, variety shows, things like that. But it's somewhere that I go to try and expose myself to Japanese. I like watching the NHK documentaries that actually you can watch over here on NHK World on the television with a dub, but on this subreddit they quite often upload the original documentaries from NHK in Japanese. They're called 72 Hours in Japan, I think it's something along those lines, definitely 72 Hours something. And these are just sort of half-hour documentaries that take place over 3 days, and they go to a place or an event or something and just film it for 3 days and explain it and let you know. Like there was one that was on television the other day that was about the night train to Izumo. And they met people on the train, find out why they're going to Izumo, why they're taking the night train, etc., etc. You can find really interesting things on there, and it's a good way again to expose yourself to Japanese. And that's one way that I like to keep motivated, by watching those, expose myself to the Japanese, and learn bits and pieces about Japan that I hadn't learned yet. You see Japan, and it's just another motivating factor to think, yeah, that was a big part of my life, and it's something I really want to hold on to and keep going with. So that's another way. I still watch Japanese films. That's one thing that I really got into when I was studying Japanese, was Japanese cinema, and I still try and watch those now and then. And reading bits of Japanese wherever I can. I don't really have great access to Japanese books, but I've got a few that I've collected over the years, and so I still try and read now and then what I can, but that's a little bit more difficult. But it's really just exposing myself to the language as much as possible to keep that that passion, and to remind myself that I have that passion, and I don't want it to fade. So that's the big thing that I do to try and keep myself motivated. Another thing that might seem quite insignificant, but actually really helps me a lot to keep that interest, is actually watching a lot of J-vloggers. Surprisingly enough, I spend a lot of time watching the J-vloggers that I follow. I've been watching J-vloggers for years and years and years now. It was one way that really I found of getting a really good introduction to Japan when I was first setting out on this path of studying Japanese, way back in 2000 and probably mid 2008, so about 7 years ago now was when I first really decided to pursue studying Japanese. And one of the first things that confirmed that decision in my mind was getting onto YouTube and watching people who were already out in Japan, watching foreigners who were already out in Japan, and seeing their experiences, and really it really hitting home that yes, that's what I want to do. I want to go to university, I want to go out to Japan, I want to have that experience, and I want to learn the language. I think the first YouTuber I ever really got into, that got me into J-vlogging, was someone who's still going strong now, and that's My Argonauts. So I'm sure many of you know him. Jason has been doing videos for years in Japan. He started out in JET and he's now working as a university professor out in Japan. And watching his videos, watching other people's videos, getting into all the big YouTubers. The Tokyo Kuni was still big back then. People like Victor and Hiko Simon, and watching those videos, those J-vloggers, really kept me going in the beginning, and really not kept me going. That sounds like we're struggling, but really sort of helped to ignite the flame in the beginning. And it's something I still do now. Years and years later, I still try and watch as many J-vloggers as possible, and it really just it keeps me motivated. It keeps me going and makes me think, that's what I was doing. I love doing that, and I want to keep myself in that community and keep up with what's going on, because it's a little subculture that I've always really enjoyed, and I'm glad that it's still going strong. In fact, probably getting stronger and stronger. The faces have changed slightly, but there are a lot of old heads that are still going, and there are a lot of great new YouTube J-vloggers that I follow, and it's really a great window into Japan and the different things that you can do in Japan as a foreigner. There are plenty of people out there who are doing vlogs from their years abroad, but then there are plenty of people who are out there working and making their own careers of it, and that's another thing that just keeps me, really drives home to me that, even though I've finished studying Japanese at university, even though I don't have any intention of going back to Japan to teach English, and I don't have any solid plans to go back to Japan anytime soon, it really helps me to remember that there are other ways to go back out there, and there are other things I could do if I ever wanted to go back out there. So there's various tips and tricks that I use to keep myself going. The best part of a decade after I first started learning Japanese, and I still enjoy it. That is the big key. If I didn't enjoy it, no amount of tricks would be able to keep me studying Japanese. It's still something that I absolutely love doing. I still love that feeling of cracking a grammar point and it really clicking for the first time, or remembering some tricky vocabulary that I hadn't got before, or listening to a podcast and a topic that I wouldn't have been able to get my head around before, suddenly all falling into place. And but you have to keep yourself motivated no matter how much you love a thing, there needs to be reasons to keep doing it. Otherwise, it can all seem a little bit futile. But that's how I do it. That's what keeps me going and keeps me studying Japanese and keeps me involved with the language. Yeah, if any of you out there are also, have finished your JET program, or you're a graduate, or you've studied Japanese and you've been out to Japan in the past, but now you find yourselves back in your own countries without really a plan to go back. Do you keep studying Japanese? How do you keep yourself motivated and stick with the language? I'd love to know. Leave me some comments, make some videos, and I'll catch you next time. Thanks for watching.